to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a baller.
Welcome in. Wednesday, August 9th on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. We're here together, people. It's Kyle Borganoni, your host. I'm with Matthew Betz and Jason Moore.
What it do?
Super cool intro there from Jason.
Yeah. I hit you with a what it do because
haven't heard that in a while, man.
That's what the young hip kids say. They say what it do. Yeah, big show today. A lot of big questions.
Huge questions here. And guys, we're in the gauntlet that is August leading up to the season. And in Dynasty, Dynasty never rests, really. And we have a really good show. We're going to talk about rebuilds, what to do on that. We've got some awesome listener questions about how do you stir up, some zeal right now where you've already had your rookie drafts mostly. You're waiting on the season. So just how to get good league involvement. So guys, is there any league right now that you're in that you can kind of feel your league like, okay, the cobwebs are coming off and people are talking, or at least talking smack right now? Is there any of your dynasty leagues right now where you're seeing people come out of the woodworks?
All of my leagues, they're hot right now. They're going. Andy just made a ridiculous trade in our main dynasty league this morning to overpay for Zamir White.
What did he give up? Can we share?
Yeah, I'll share. I don't mind. He admits he overpaid. He totally recognizes he overpaid. His is a situational
fear.
It's a fear. He has a really, really good team, championship level team. He made a trade for Josh Jacobs. He needs Josh Jacobs to be a part of that. If he loses Josh Jacobs to this holdout or whatever, or a trade or etc., then he is really hurting. He goes from great to hurting. So he traded for Zamir White, and he gave up a 2026 first-round pick. And so it's far away. It's in the distant future, but also giving up a first-round pick for a guy that's probably never going to do anything is setting it on fire. Whereas, the alternative there is, should Josh Jacobs not, come to fruition, should he sit out the whole year, maybe try to use that first-round pick for someone that, will be relevant.
And he also got back a third in the deal, correct? I believe Andy also got a third.
There was more to the deal, but I don't remember what it was. So
I'm looking at it now. It was Zamir White in a third, and he gave up a first, which, yes, it's an overpay, but I get it. And Andy's one of those managers that he goes all in, and he doesn't really have a backup plan usually. Mm-mm. So, it's not like Andy's never going to say, I'm going to go in, and if it doesn't work out, I'll play for next year. He's fully playing for this year. So, I don't know. Is it Zamir White? Is it Brandon Bolden? Is it Amir Abdullah? Who knows?
Boys.
I mean, the boys of the summer, the boys of last year's Hall of Fame game that all of us, including me, the only person in the world that got that situation right last year was Brooks.
Yeah.
He was the only one that saw it coming.
And not just out of the ballers, everybody everywhere. No, people drafted Josh Jacobs. The people that won leagues last year was very upsetting to me. It was very upsetting because most leagues, Josh Jacobs was, I think statistically speaking, he was the most valuable pick in redraft leagues last year. And the people that ended up with Josh Jacobs were usually the people not paying attention. In our league of record, it's not the best manager was the one that got Josh Jacobs. It's you just got lucky is how it felt. Everyone was wrong. But what do you do? Yeah,
and those are the kind of trades that you get to make right now as we still are waiting for more information. If you want to get up-to-date information, you can get that in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus. We're updating everything. The Kareem Hunt news, we were all over that. We have it in our Dynasty Pass. We're updating blurbs, updating projections, everything else for people. And then this is something I think people don't realize is that you can put your Dynasty team in our Draft Analyzer, and we can kind of give you an overview of here's where you can improve your team. So I don't know if you guys have done this for your teams. I have. It says I'm weak at running back, but I also think that's all Dynasty teams. My depth's bad.
Yeah, it won't be my Dynasty team, but the Ultimate Draft Kit is a really exceptional tool. We're all players of this game. We care almost more about our own teams than we care about, the analysis at large, because we're just so competitive, and that's the tool I use for everything. I mean, the Dynasty Pass is fire. It is awesome. It's in the Ultimate Draft Kit. This is the time to get it.
Yeah, and Betz, any recent updates you got to make to the Ultimate Draft Kit?
I just did a quick update yesterday to best ball rankings. Basically, just trying to make sure those are lined up, and those are part of the UDK Plus too. So, yeah, I wanted to make sure those were up to date with news we're getting, and staying in line with some ADP changes and stuff. And I know this is a Dynasty show, but I mean, come on, we
went through the Dynasty. We went through Dynasty rankings today as well. Yeah. I mean, Betz, you scoured through to make sure that everything was in line. That we looked and said, Tim Patrick probably needs to go down even further. Then we moved him down just because of his age and his injury. Now that it's been officially confirmed, and so yeah, we're always going through this and updating it.
Yeah, the classic Jake Turd Ferguson update that we needed to give when he's the, apparently the number one tight end. So, yep, all those are up to date in the Ultimate Draft Kit. I wanted to start us off before we get into the deep weeds of listener questions and talk about rebuilds. We got a couple of questions. One's from Sean Norton, said, what's the best way to decide between staying the course and blowing it up and going full rebuild? And another follow-up question from Vinny, what's one tip you would give somebody who's kind of entered a rebuild? So, Betz, I'll let you start first.
Yeah, I'll speak to someone adopting a team or taking over an orphan is really like, you don't know what your league mates, who they value highly, who they don't. If you've been playing with people for a while, you kind of get an understanding of like, okay, this guy values running backs, this guy values wide receivers, and you might be able to, I think in those situations, get deals done, maybe that take a little longer to get done. But if you're just new into this, like, I'd be kind of firing off trades pretty aggressively to start to see if you can get some good values and really kind of get things moving. So it's tough if you are just adopting a team, especially if they are in a rebuild. But I think if you are embracing that, like, you got to get a couple of blue chip guys. And if you don't have that, being able to take some shots, get rookie picks, and really try to think about that, basically like, can I get a blue chip player in a rookie draft situation versus I've got a couple middling guys that might keep me alive. Like, I think you do need to really tear it down if you are truly in a rebuild. And of course, that's the tricky conversation, right? Is because it's not always black and white. It's oftentimes very gray. But if your team it's staring you in the face, like, hey man, it's time, I'd be pretty aggressive with some of those trades.
Do you guys feel like the allure of a rebuild is kind of like a siren song in the sense of like, if you're kind of caught in the middle, you're like, okay, which way should I go? Like, rebuild sounds good because you don't really have to deal with like the negatives, like, oh, my team's bad, and it's fine. It's going to be, but I think the reality is that oftentimes teams are stuck in a rebuild or trying to rebuild longer than they realize because of the idea of like, this is what this could be. This is, this is utopia. I can find this team. I can get 10 different young players. When I think most leagues, that doesn't really happen. So do you feel like that's more of like it's a nice idea for a lot of teams like that are in the middle?
I think it is alluring. I think it is enticing, and I like you calling it the siren song, right? Because what do? They murder you. They you don't want to listen to the siren song. I believe that most of the time, and there are situations where a rebuild is what you need. You got to tear down to the nubs and go. But most of the time, you do not need to do that. Most of the time, if you play for now, you can keep playing for now. And the real heart of this question is, how do you know? Right? The question is, how do I know when it's time to rebuild? And for me, it is simply this. Do I have a chance, a realistic chance, to make the playoffs? And I'm not talking in the middle of the season. In the middle of the season, maybe you've had some bad beats, you've had a couple losses, you're getting close to the end, and you're like, I got to win 3 out of my last 4 games, and maybe it's tough. I'm just saying, generically speaking, over the course of your season, you look at your roster going into a year, does my team look like I have a chance to make the playoffs? If yes, then you absolutely should not rebuild, because I think too often people don't realize that the real hardest thing to do is to make the playoffs. It feels like, oh, that's easy. I've made the playoffs a lot. I just haven't won a championship. Winning a championship is a little, there's just a little bit more luck to it once you're in the playoffs. It's getting to the playoffs that takes skill.
Like your teams, Jason. Like just there's a small amount that you just kind of got there on technicalities.
Right, and then win a championship over and over and over. It's just, honestly, it's exhausting for everyone around me how often I win the championship. But my point is, if you believe that your team has a chance to make the playoffs, then fight for this year and always fight for this year. You talk about, Kyle, Andy's team. Andy is always playing for the moment. Always. And for the last 3 years, I think he thought, well, this will be the last year I can do it. This will be the last year. And every year he's trading future assets for current assets, and he's competing over and over and over. If you make moves and you make good deals and you try to keep your, paying attention to what's going on, which if you're listening to this show, you're going to be one of those dynasty managers that's in the know, that, you're not going to just be destroying your own team. Just keep fighting. Just keep going for this year, and you'll win a championship. I mean, not necessarily this year. Only one person wins it in every league. But, yeah, that's my mentality. You can almost always keep playing for now, and it's a rare situation where I feel like you should really, really, really rebuild. And when you rebuild, you got to go hardcore. When you decide, this team can't make the playoffs, all my players aged out, then you got to play for 2 years from now, tear it down, and build it up like a phoenix.
So inspirational, Jason. Just keep fighting, man. Just keep fighting. I'm inspired after that.
I've had a couple of teams where I feel like I am stuck in the middle. I get the allure of that. But what I've done, and I think it's a really easy thing, is list out your 4 to 5 most valuable players on your team. Okay? Just look at your roster and say, with 4 to 5 players, 1, can I make the playoffs? And then on top of that, do I have right now at least 2 to 3 bench pieces that I can at least start, in a pinch? And then from there, you can kind of assess, can I compete? But with a rebuild, I think people, what they don't do is they don't really set a timeline. They just kind of push it out there and say, hey, my team's rebuilding, and you end up just forever doing that. So you need to ask yourself, what do you need to get there? And for me, if I'm going to start a rebuild, if I'm making that decision and realize draft picks become more valuable as you get towards your league's trade deadline, I need at least 3 to 4 first-round picks as ammo, and I would love 3 to 4 first-round picks that weren't just mine. That's where I want to start a rebuild. So I did it with a team. I traded away Stephon Diggs, and I traded away Dalvin Cook a year too early, and so I had ammo on a team that had a major injury, and I traded away 2 really good players, and I ended up with 5 first-round picks over 2 years that I was able to start that process knowing this team is going to stink for another year. But at least I was able to think forward, as opposed to, I think a lot of times people just decide before the season when there are teams that can totally make it. So I think there's some practicalities sometimes to rebuilding that people don't realize. And also that your rookie picks won't solve everything, right? There's rookie picks where you got Jamar Chase, and there's rookie picks where you got N'Keal Harry. And that sets you back even further. So keep that in mind. N'Keal Harry, by the way, did you guys see that? Minnesota Viking, N'Keal Harry?
Yeah, look at
He's
that.
back, baby.
Still in the NFL.
Did you see what number he got?
No.
Number 28, Adrian Peterson's number.
That's
I
funny.
don't know why.
Couple of
I don't know
goats.
why they did that.
Couple of Minnesota Vikings goats right there.
Gosh, it still haunts me that I have N'Keal Harry. I had him on a roster, and then I had to let him go because it was worthless. But let's get into some listener questions.
Mailbag.
If you want to get your questions answered best, I just want to recommend our Discord channel, where the Dynasty Keeper, the Dynasty Superflex, the Dynasty Trade Advice, those channels are hopping all the time, and I always see people and I always see conversation in there. So if you're a member at jointhefoot.com, you get to be a part of that. And yeah, our Dynasty channels are the place where people want to talk. This first question is something that I see people ask all the time. It's a question that people ask about specifically the Ballers and their league. And it's from Shoes on Twitter. He asks, what is your preferred Dynasty settings? The roster size, the starting lineup, and then how many rounds do you consider for a startup? So Jason, you're the main Dynasty league that's been going on for a long time. Do you want to give just kind of the overview of how that league is kind of formatted?
Yeah, so we've got 26 roster spots, a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flex, a tight end, 18 bench, and 2 IR spots. Obviously if you are going to be adding a defense, if you're adding kicker, don't do that. But if you are doing that in your dynasty leagues, you need to have a couple more roster spots available. If it's a super flex league, you should have another roster spot. I think a dynasty number that's really good is around 30 roster spots total. Like that to me is not too deep when you've got 30 spots. And as far as other details, it's really beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I prefer non-superflex leagues. I personally prefer non-taxi squad leagues. Both of those are good. Like those aren't pieces of advice where I'd say like, oh, like I'm not going to go, don't play in a taxi league. That's fun. Don't play in a superflex league. No, great. Those are good things, but those are preferences. Right. Those are things that you just, who's in your league? What do you want? Put it to a vote. Play what you want. Do you want full PPR? I prefer half PPR. But those are all preferences. I think the main thing, though, is if you're doing a startup draft, the main thing is what's your starting roster size, and how many total players are you drafting? Somewhere between 26 and 30. And that might be dependent upon whether or not you have rookies in your startup draft. So, or if you're going to do like an additional supplemental draft. I know when we started our main Dynasty League, what we did is we had the draft and rookies were not in it. And then the rookie draft was following that, and it was in the reverse order of the startup draft. So whoever got the 12 at 13 had the 101, etc. So that's kind of how our league is. Am I missing anything? Any preferences you guys have?
I share a lot of the same opinions on that stuff. I played in a league for years with defense, and it was like the most stressful thing ever. It's like, this is not – I don't want to predict who's going to be a good defense in 2 years, right? Like, that's silly. So I think if you don't have those, you'll have more fun. And as far as the taxi thing goes, I think it's kind of one of those either-or things for me. Like, if you have 30 roster spots, you will have plenty of room on your roster to stash a couple of sleepers that you like. If you have, like, 20 roster spots without a taxi – then it becomes a little thin. So I would say like kind of either or. If it's 2025, throw a taxi on there, which will allow you to, get a couple sleepers and you stash them on. And if it doesn't work out, no big deal. You cut them the next year and you move on. But it kind of is fun if you do have a taxi squad. Like the year after, like everyone kind of goes through a period of time, like, I don't know, the NFL playoffs, early February, where it's like, okay, I haven't looked at my dynasty roster for 2 or 3 weeks. Like I need to kind of just take a little break. And then you come back to your team and you're like, oh, kind of forgot I had Chicago on my taxi squad. Sweet, for the next year. So I kind of like it for that reason, but largely the same ideas as Jason.
Yeah, I'm in a bunch of different leagues. I've done taxi squads before, and they're fine. I just feel like you end up turning those over, and maybe 1 out of 5 really end up making your roster anyway. So it's fine. In the Superflex Dynasty leagues I'm in one that also starts 3 wide receivers. That's a fun league. It's full PPR, so you kind of get these big, huge scoring weeks, which is really hard when I'm in my other leagues that are redraft leagues and I'm comparing scores. I'm like, oh, well, this one has super flex and 3 wide receivers. So it's up to you, okay? So don't clown on anyone if they do one a certain way. It's super fun. Unless
it's kickers, and then clown away. Yes. If they're doing kickers, just clown on them.
It's one of the few things that I will say in Dynasty, I feel no reason to add kickers in there. And back to defense, like you mentioned, Betz, like no one's going to ever trade defenses. Like it's just, you could, some degenerates will, but like they're not going to end up on the wire, and you're just going to end up clogging roster spots with like, oh, I have 3 defenses. It's like, yeah, for me in Dynasty, it just seems not as fun, but there's also the people out there that play Dynasty IDP and they do all of that and they enjoy it too. So lots of different routes to go. Next question from @PrestonTheGreat on Twitter. How do you stimulate trade talks in a league full of lamos? I like that he called them lamos.
Lamos.
What do you guys think?
You don't. You don't. That's the truth. Everybody always wants to know this. When you're in a bad league and there's not communication and people aren't talking, which is what I would refer to as lamos, it's just not. The fixable part is not. You can't skip to the trading. You got to build the relationships. You got to have friendships. You got to have communication about the league. Like if you're in a league that's talking about the league all the time and they're just enjoying fantasy football and talking trash, trades will come because people care. People are paying attention. It's a hobby that they're invested in. So it's really a matter of you gotta change the league relationships from being lame to being involved. Then trading comes. You can't just take a lame league and force trading to happen. I mean, if that's your only goal, then make really bad trade offers that are in their favor, and then they will accept a trade, and that's the only way you can get it done.
What do you do if, like, you're, I don't know, like Betz, and you are that lame-o in the league? What would you know?
Come on,
what would you do? You are.
If it was me in this league, not the lame-o, I'd be going to footclanleagues.com first off. But if it feels like work to like get, a league chat started or get trade talk started, like the league probably is not for you. Like if you're that into it and your friends or your league mates aren't, like it's not a good fit, right? We just had what was really hilarious. We're going to talk about a Colts running back after this break. Spoiler alert, but we just had, some news come through that Kareem Hunt is visiting the Colts after the Saints. And one of my league mates just traded like a 2026 second for Kareem Hunt because he has Alvin Kamara and like he's going for it this year. And we all made fun of him. We're like, dude, Kamara's washed. We're all making fun of him in the group chat. If that stuff isn't happening in your leagues, like it's probably time for a new league.
Yes. I was looking at this question and I thought the best way to gauge this is just go through my leagues on Sleeper, on the different platforms that I have and go, now, is this a lame league? Or do people trade? It's like all of my leagues, people trade because they're into it. And I get that this is, what we do with our life and our professions. But I would say the people that make those leagues aren't people that work for the fantasy footballers, right? Like there's people in the leagues that get the culture, that trash talk, that are in a group thread while I'm even recording this right now, just talking nonstop about football. So find yourself a good league, like Betz mentioned, at jointhefoot.com. And we will take a break and talk about those Colts running back. And we're back. And guys, when you're doing breaking stuff on a show, a Dynasty show, it's tough because earlier today we were talking about Kareem Hunt and we were talking about him on the Saints, and we're getting news right now as of this recording, it could change later, that he's on the Colts. And so let's talk about Kareem Hunt, and I think it's a good segue into this conversation. Someone asked, what's your outlook for Evan Hull, the rookie running back for the Colts, given this current situation of JTT? So let's talk about Hunt, and then we'll talk about Evan Hull. And I feel like we're kind of speculating still too, but what are your thoughts on Hunt in general? Is he just done?
Wait, he didn't sign with the Colts.
No, but he's visiting them.
You said with the Colts. Okay, man, you got me a little worried there.
I said he was visiting the Colts. Visiting the Colts.
Whew, Kyle, breaking news that isn't true on the show. Spreading fake news. My take, I'll jump in. My take on Kareem Hunt is I think he's done. I think we saw it last year. If you look at any of the efficiency metrics and the data kind of backs that up, he's at an age where it's a little worrisome. And, there's a reason he hasn't been on the roster for the entire offseason, right? So if the JT thing wasn't happening, if Zach Moss didn't break his forearm, I don't think Kareem Hunt would be visiting the Colts. So it's one of those things where it's like, let's maybe get another camp body in here. Same thing. I don't really think he was a lock to be active on game days if he goes to New Orleans either. Like, I mean, they've got Kamara 3 games, of course, but they signed Jamal Williams. They draft Kendra Miller, as a day 2 pick. Like, he's not a roster lock by any means. So I think he's pretty much done at this point.
Yeah, I don't know that he's exactly washed. Kyle brought up and found the stat that he basically was the leader in third down snaps last year.
Insane.
So he was on the field. He was active. His efficiency numbers were certainly worse. What's funny is this offseason, Kareem Hunt has been crickets. I haven't heard any team interested, any team talking about bringing him in. I haven't heard him working out or doing anything. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's like, Kareem Hunt's going to sign with the Saints. And then it's almost like the Colts are like, oh, yeah, there's Kareem Hunt's out there. Let's call him and see if he can come in. We really need someone. But I do think he'll be not necessarily relevant. I don't think he's going to be a relevant player that you're going to start in fantasy. I do think he will impact wherever he goes. He will get on the field. I think he will make the roster and have an effect elsewhere. As far as The question about, rookie sensation pass catching running back, Evan Hall, I just didn't like the landing spot, right? He's a great pass catcher, and he's going to a place where you don't expect Anthony Richardson to utilize that trait very well. He had a good breakout age. He's, at least he's over 200 pounds. He's 209. There's some things to like there, and especially the depth chart around him being broken right now, I think you'd say. I didn't think it was a nice meeting of skill sets.
For sure. I think this is one of those players that you get excited because he breaks a lot of our, metrics when you look at like dominator rating and, all the different things he did at Northwestern. And then when you see the draft capital, you see the landing spot, and you see how many of these players that are day 3 running backs just never work out in general, then he's a fun stash. Like when we all had that period in our life where it's just like, I had a really fun mustache for a while. That's it. Just a fun stash. It's fun. Maybe your wife doesn't like it. Jason, have you ever gone just mustache?
Well, I had to for a Jeff Fisher Halloween costume, and I rocked a big old stash. That was a full, as much as I can do. I mean, I've got the full beard, right? So I just shaved everything else, had a big Jeff Fisher mustache, but I only had that for a day. It was not good.
She didn't love. She loved it for like the makeup and all that part, but then she hated it afterwards.
Yeah, I think it was less about the mustache and more about my fat thumb-looking face and neck. I need a beard. It was the absence of a beard, not the presence of a mustache, that was the problem.
But it wasn't you. It was Jeff Fisher. That's what she didn't like.
Oh no, she loved when I looked like Jeff Fisher. I mean, that was looking hot.
Can I just say the timing of this? We're recording this the evening before. We're recording this on 8/8, boys. It is Jeff Fisher's day on the show.
That's right. I was reminded when I was on Hard Knocks talking about when it was the Rams, and they were talking about Jeff Fisher Day. Just today, someone was talking about that. They were like, "Wait, you didn't see when we were on Hard Knocks?" And I was like, "I was on Hard Knocks. I completely forgot."
I had forgot about that too. So back to Mustache McGee here, Evan Hall. He's fun. He's a fun player, but yeah, if he was a Patriot, all right, if he was like some other if he was on the Chargers, would you be like, "Ooh, this is a fun player. We could see a year or two from now what he is," but he is not. And so, into your bench, enjoy that, but it's not a great situation with a rookie quarterback. Next question from Discord is from Wookie Mistake. With the running back landscape pushing out running backs at the end of their rookie deals, should dynasty managers get away from trading for breakout running backs and instead assemble a stockpile of picks? And this is something we talked about a little bit on the running backs ranking show. So any further thoughts, guys, from when we talked about that of just here's how contracts are working out and how should dynasty managers adjust?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in kind of just the general strategy around running backs. Like, I mean, I love to just build around these younger wide receivers. And so I've been kind of leaning into this stuff even more as we enter this season of these running backs are such a scary investment because these guys that are great aren't really getting the contract and, financial security that they would like or that you as a dynasty manager would like them to have. And so, man, entering the season, like the running back position as a whole has never felt more shaky. I mean, we're 4 weeks out from week 1, and like in redraft leagues, like you don't know who you're taking because JT's not there, and Breece Hall's still injured, and all that sort of stuff. So that plus the contract issues, like I'm trying to in my leagues that I'm contenders, like identify, these are the guys who have, maybe a year or two, but like I know that they're entering this year. We talked about it on a recent show. Like I traded for Nick Chubb. I know he's not the best name for Dynasty because of the age, but man, the projection looks great this year. People are excited about the Browns. He's gonna be there. Like we know that. So I have really tried to avoid chasing the other guys or trading for the other guys that have those uncertainties. Personally, maybe that's a short-sighted take that might be wrong in the long term, but that's kind of how I've been viewing it for this year and moving forward.
Yeah, it's just really hard to just trade for a running back. Like think about that. Like if you're a contending team and you want to add depth, it's going to be really hard because the teams that are contending are thinking the same exact thing. So it's not just as easy as I can trade away this running back and get a haul. But our advice has always been, if you need to trade them a year early, that's okay. You're going to get a haul. They're still going to be worth something. If you did it with Todd Gurley, if you did it with Jonathan Taylor, you could still do it. So keep that in mind and go back to that running back.
Do you guys have any
show.
cheaper running back targets that you could get for a contender that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg?
So we do have a question. I'll just lump this in. This is from Dragon9. He said, who would be some running back trade targets that you could trade a second round pick for? Which, would you say that's a good price if you're a contender, like you're willing to give up your second?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're a contender and you're wanting to try to take a shot on someone that can affect your roster now for a second round pick, yeah, sign me up. I mean, you've got short-term guys. There's different archetypes, right? You can get like a Samaje Perine that looks like it's someone that might be involved and maybe has a good stretch, but doesn't seem like he's got a long-term dynasty outlook, or a David Montgomery, someone that he's the less exciting player on his own roster. I don't know if you can – he's weird because I don't know that you could get him for a second, and no one would pay a first for him. You know what I mean? So it's
2
like
seconds.
It seems like his value, like 2 seconds or something, but he would be someone that I think you could still try to target or work around because the value – I believe he will score more fantasy points than his perceived value is.
All right, let me list you some names. Would you rather have a second round pick or these names? Okay, so second round or Jaylen Warren?
Jaylen Warren.
I think I'd take Warren.
I think I would too. Second round pick or Khalil Herbert?
Herbert.
Yeah, and do you think the Herbert manager wants to give them up though for a second?
No, I think if you've got Herbert and you've held on to him and now they've got their shot, you're probably going to hold on, and you're not trying to unload Herbert right now.
Yeah, that's somebody I think if you did a second and, another hopeful wide receiver, you could get it done if your team needs it. Would you rather have a second or Rashad Penny, who a year from now could be nothing?
I offered my second for Rashad Penny, so I've put my money where my mouth is on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's a good target, I think, because there's some uncertainty about Swift's role, Penny's role. There's some game well talk and third downs and, the 2-minute drill stuff. So people aren't sure. But if you're not a contender, like you might be thinking, all right, this is my last chance to get out. And so sure, I'll take a second. So I think he's a great target. The other name that came to mind, and this, we just need to make sure like over the next week or two, the Dalvin Cook thing doesn't happen, but like Jeff Wilson, you can get for like pennies, right? Like you can get him for a late second probably. I mean, if Cook goes there, then that's not great. But if he doesn't, like he's popped. I know Mike has him pretty high in rankings for this year, so he's a guy that I'm like, okay, if I'm making a bet, I know A-Chain's going to be there with the change of pace role, super explosive. But Penny's 31 years old. The injury history stuff is obviously very lengthy. Jeff is I think 27, 28. So if I'm taking a shot, I think he'd be the guy for me in Miami.
Those are the type of players, if you are a contender, that it doesn't sound great to give up a second, and the next year you look back, you're like, oh, where'd my second go? I gave it up for a running back, but you just got to acquire those players. Like I did it a couple years ago for A.J. Dillon before he was super involved. Like remember A.J. Dillon rookie year was just like meh, and I was like, I'm just going to take the gamble that maybe he's more than something else, and I don't regret that at all. Second round pick for A.J. Dillon. He's been a depth piece. I've been able to start him, and still waiting if he's the dude if Aaron Jones goes down. So keep that in mind, second round picks.
Yeah, it's the perfect example of this is when you're trading those seconds, you think they're going to be more valuable than they oftentimes are. I'm just looking back at like our Dino Junior league that we're in, Kyle, together. The last offline board that I have pulled up, it's 2021, and there were 3 running backs that went in the second round. It was Trey Sermon, Kenneth Gainwell, and Chuba Hubbard. And those all felt pretty good when you made the picks, and they are worthless. You wouldn't trade a second round for any, you wouldn't trade for those players now with your second rounder. So yeah, if you can get a known commodity, that is doing something or has proven on the NFL field that he could be of value, yeah, you take the player over the pick.
Next question's from Josh Board. He says, I'm working on something called a manager rating metric. We'll call it an MRM. What do you think can be measured that can measure a really good manager in a dynasty league. So it seems like what he's trying to do is kind of come up with something fun for his league and figure out, like, how do I figure out who the best manager is other than just they won the championship? So far I've got who's finished above their projected wins, who wins the championship and playoff wins, their trade activity, their total points. Is there anything that you would add? And I'll just say this from like I'm commissioner leagues and I'm a part of leagues. Like, I love adding this stuff in so that every single week you can kind of update it. I know that Yahoo, this is super frustrating, has something where they rate different managers. And in my home league, I am clear, far and away, the best manager according to Yahoo's metrics, but I've never won that league. So it makes me feel like crap every time I see it. But any random metrics of just like, hey, this would be a fun way to gauge who's a good manager?
I think there's two things that I would throw in there. One would be waiver activity. Usually the more active managers on waivers are better. That's not always, but you know, they're more active. And then the other one is what I said earlier. I think it's the best barometer of talent. Like, if I could only have one thing, if I could just have, like, okay, you could only have one thing, how do you know who is the best manager over the last decade in your league? It would be simply playoff appearances. That's it. Who gets to the playoffs? That's skill to me in fantasy. Like, if I look at a league, I go, how often does this manager make the playoffs? That's it.
Another thing too, one more thing. I think that's a great one, Jason, is it's just how often do you kind of hit on like your second and third round rookie picks? I mean, none of us hit on them at a high level, but if there's someone in your league who's like consistently being like, man, how did that guy fall to him again? He found the guy that fell in round 2 again, and he became a startable player.
I like that.
Like, that's kind of a good.
I like that a lot.
You can identify maybe someone who has more of an eye for talent, scouting.
You got to go back 2 years,
analytics.
and you grade the drafts 2 years later.
Yeah,
and give everybody like a for the round a letter grade, and then go back. I like that a lot.
That sounds like a really fun task to go, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go look at my draft from 2019 and just tell my whole league, hey, you were really smart. Stroke their ego, do whatever you need to. I mean, if you could measure one thing for a manager, it's got to be grit and moxie and poise, which obviously you can't. I did think it would be fun if you went back and just looked at close losses, like painful losses, to at least like show the managers like, hey, your team was good and it just stinks who you're playing. So, there's lots of fun ways to add that in the league. Put that in your league newsletter, league podcast, whatever it is.
Okay. I went back and I looked here at 2020, Kyle, since we're doing this. Let's take a look at how we fared against each other in this league. It looks like in the first round, I had 2 picks. I selected J.K. Dobbins in the middle of the first. How would you grade that pick?
It's fine.
That's a tough one because he's been great when he's on the field, but he's been
definitely
injured.
not a bad pick. No.
All right.
Definitely not a bad pick.
Kyle had one, a few picks after that.
No, I know what this is.
Keyshawn Vaughn. How would you grade that pick?
What's funny is I traded up ahead of you a spot.
Oh yeah. Oh, I see me. I'm right after you. I selected someone named Joe Burrow. Okay. So
seems slightly better than
J.K. Dobbins. You got Joe Burrow, but you got now. To be fair to Kyle, with the last pick in the draft, Jalen Hurts.
That was my pick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why did I have the last pick?
Have you won a championship in that league?
I was the first champion, Jason.
Oh gosh, I don't remember. It's just 3 years in a row of me winning, so I don't remember time before I was champion.
Whatever. Next one from Colin Moses 10 on Twitter. If you have Amari Cooper, should you hold or trade him away? If you're trading him, what's a realistic expectation to receive for him? Betz, and I'll let you start.
I hate giving these cop-out answers on the show, but it really does just depend. I mean, if you're a contending manager in your league, I'm holding Amari Cooper. Like, there's a reason people are excited about the Browns this year, and Deshaun Watson may be returning to form. And I mean, Amari Cooper was awesome last year with Jacoby Brissett. He was great, top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. And so, I don't think anyone's projecting that, obviously, but
how was he with Deshaun Watson?
Oh, how was everyone with Deshaun Watson? Not great, Bob. Not great. We talked about on one of the DFS and betting shows, like the EPA stuff for Watson. I mean, he was down there with Zach Wilson and Carson Wentz last year, which was just crazy to see. But man, if he does return to form, like Amari Cooper's got, top 15 in the range of outcomes again this year. So I'm holding him. He still has 2 years left on his deal, and next year, $11.3 million dead cap. So, I mean, they're going to have him on the roster. So I'm holding him for 2 years if I'm a contender. Definitely willing to trade him away, though, I think, if you are looking to rebuild.
He did have a 2-touchdown game with Watson in week 17. So there's, because I've been looking at his numbers too. I'm like, it was garbage. And there's a little bit of hope there. I think you kind of have to hold him. Like, he's going to be on this team, I assume, next year, but they're going to run into a ton of cap issues when they start having to deal with Watson's number. Like right now, it's like a team-friendly number, and then it's just going to keep getting pushed down the road. So, I don't know, age 30, Jason, like, do you think he's still got at least 2 years left?
I do. I think he's a hold. Amari Cooper for several years now has not been valued to the degree of his worth. In startup drafts right now, just generic ADP startups, it looks like he's around wide receiver 34. So I don't – if you go, I'm going to capitalize on him before he ages out, I just don't think he's the type of player you can capitalize on. You're not going to get much for him. The players that you want to capitalize on before they age out are Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, guys that they're going to bring a haul, and then they're not going to last forever. Amari Cooper is going to last as long as those guys do, but he's not going to net you much. So he's better to just hold the value of and keep getting his fantasy points, because you're not going to turn him into 2 young stud wide receivers for the next, 7-8 years.
You could probably get a first for him, though, don't you think? Like a mid-first if you're in a rebuild?
That's what I was thinking.
I don't know. I don't know that people are spicy enough. Obviously, if it's mid-season and he's on fire, sure, maybe to a contending team, but I'm not sure you could get that.
Also, I'd just like to point out Kyle's trying to bury Amari Cooper before he is actually 30. He's 29.2, Kyle. So check yourself there, brother.
I'm saying that he will live. He will be breathing that when he is 30 years old. I am confident of this. So, yeah, I think you can get a first, and then at trade deadline, maybe a little bit more. We'll see. Next one's from Scott Tyler. Is there a situation in which you guys would not take a quarterback in the first round of a 12-team Dynasty Superflex startup? My answer is yes, yes, yes. I've done it a lot.
My answer is absolutely. Yeah, I don't think that the first 12 picks or the first 24 picks in a dynasty startup draft should be quarterbacks. So, yeah, there's situations like that, and there's some situations where I would almost never take a quarterback. If I'm at like the 12-13 turn in a third-round reversal league,
yes,
I'm almost definitely I'll use that third-round pick on the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go to the site and look at the top 12, it's not all quarterbacks in 2 quarterback leagues. I mean, the elite wide receivers are awesome. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson. Those guys should be going in round 1 ahead of the tier 3 quarterbacks. We all agree on that.
Yeah, you can look on our site, our 2 QB rankings, Superflex, and we did a couple of shows. Jason was on that show. We talked about Superflex rankings, and maybe, when you sort by quarterback scoring and everything else, of course, you're going to see, like, I need to take one at the beginning, but we talked a lot about supply and demand and the way that looks, so make sure you check that out. The next one is from Blue on Twitter or on X, whatever you call it these days. When do you move on from a rookie or second-year player that isn't performing as well as you thought they would? And I'll just start off by saying the hardest part is separating yourself from what you spent in a rookie draft on a player. Like, I spent the 102 on N'Keal Harry because I did that, and it stayed with him for a year or two where I couldn't move off him, and people wouldn't give me what I wanted for him. But I will give you a stat, and then you guys can kind of follow up. For me, with wide receivers, I think it's the hardest to move on. If you have a wide receiver that was taken on day 1 or day 2 of the draft, it's easy to kind of lock in if you didn't see it in year 1 and go, well, they're still young. They'll be a second-year wide receiver. I'll give you a couple of metrics. If a rookie wide receiver, if their yards per route run is 0.8 or below, or their targets per route run is 14% or below, they're done. I mean, like, since 2014, The only person on this list that had any relevance that returned to anything was Zay Jones. And I feel like it took Zay Jones a while. Nelson Aguilar had 1 year. But other than that, like, this list is doo-doo. Like, just really bad in terms of day one, day two wide receivers. So there's a couple players that are close to these metrics, and I'm just going to bring it up for nostalgia's sake. Devontae Adams as a rookie was so bad.
Oh, Jason, yeah. We were out on. I mean, he was so bad. It was like, he stinks. And he was okay.
His targets per out run was like 15%, so he barely was above this metric. But I remember those were the early days, Jason, like 2015, 2016, whatever. And the refrain on those shows was Devontae Adams stinks and was running the wrong routes. He just looked terrible out there, but you can recover from that. So that's kind of my cutoff in terms of just pure numbers for people.
You can recover from it. He is proof of that, but you almost always do not recover from it. So like Terrace Marshall. I love Terrace Marshall. Kyle, you loved Terrace Marshall. He ain't recovering. He's not getting it done. I know that we've just, I think today, saw good camp reports from Terrace Marshall. And
really tradition.
Guy.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know, I'm excited. I hope it works. But everything we do in fantasy is a bet on odds. What's the probability? And the probability that Terrace Marshall ever flashes at this point or does something relevant is 2%. I mean, it's almost a done deal is how it feels. So I love you bringing up the cost of what you paid for a player. You've got to be able to let that go. It's irrelevant, and it can hurt you too much. If you are a smart manager, you can take advantage of that, knowing that, look, this was a top 3 overall first-round rookie draft pick. You know, you could still get something for N'Keal Harry 2 years after because the promise, the allure, what was supposed to be. If you know that there are bad metrics that say that the odds are he's not going to come back, try to capitalize.
Yeah, another one that came to mind, one more recently and then one in the past. You mentioned kind of just associating what you spent as far as draft capital on the player. Corey Davis was arguably the 1.01, 1.02 in that year, in that class. And for a couple of years, like, I mean, he ended up being an okay pro, but obviously now he's not really anything for fantasy, but he ended up being an okay pro over the course of time. And like, the name value still exists. Could you get a first for him? No, of course not. But could you recoup a second probably at some point in Corey Davis's career? Yeah, I think you could have. And a name that comes to mind this year of like, I just don't see it, is Tyquan Thornton, who did nothing last year. And there was a little bit of buzz like very early this offseason. And now we're getting reports like he's kind of fallen down the depth chart a little bit. Really uncertain situation. You just got to be willing to move on. And yeah, every now and then you are going to miss on a guy that suddenly out of nowhere rebounds, but those are just so rare. So I am trying to move on from these guys, I think, more quickly as I played Dynasty longer.
Yep. Tyquan Thornton is actually on that list under those metrics. With tight ends, just realize you're not going to be able to get a lot from year one, so just wait. Like, you're just going to have to keep waiting and maybe wait another year to see if they're anything. So
yeah, I would just not draft him, and then I would trade for him before the breakout.
Yeah, or scoop him up right after the draft, whatever you need to. If you got a taxi squad, throw them on there. This question is kind of a good follow-up. For those of us that run late summer rookie drafts, who would you be targeting in rounds 3 through 5 of a 5-round draft? Sleepers for us peepers, as they say. So, Betz, who's a couple names?
Yeah, I looked at my fantasy league's ADP over the last couple of months, and so this could be changing depending on what time of year you draft. But one of the names that I like on the list is Cardinals wide receiver Michael Wilson. I mean, there's been a lot of buzz on him getting meaningful snaps with the ones right away. And, you know, think about the context. Like, this team did not draft Rondale Moore, or the current regime didn't draft Rondale Moore. They weren't involved in the trade for Hollywood Brown, this coaching staff. Like, they're obviously wanting to see what they have in Michael Wilson. I think he's going to play a ton of snaps this year. If it's not right away, I think he works his way into the rotation and gets a ton of snaps. So I like Michael Wilson. You can probably get him in round 3 of most rookie drafts.
Jason, any names that are just on the tip of your tongue, like, you know what? Take a shot on this dude.
I like Puka Nacua, the wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. I think there's a lot of similar arguments to him and Michael Wilson in their situations of being able to get on the field early. I mean, when a rookie does not have the opportunity in today's, in modern NFL, to go out and show that they're good right away, then they usually never do. And so you want a guy who just is going to get the opportunity. Michael Wilson will get the opportunity. Puka will get the opportunity. And then, a running back, I just feel so stupid here. So you know what? I'm glad I'm bringing this name up because talk me out of it, man. I am falling for it. I am falling for all the camp stuff over itty bitty baby Deuce Vaughn.
No, I did not think you were going to say that.
I wasn't
talk
expecting
me out
that
of
either.
this. Talk me out of it. Please. I mean, when I scouted him, it was the most irrelevant player that I could scout. His ranking to me pre-NFL draft was meaningless. It's worthless. This guy cannot do something in the NFL at his size that is going to – I mean, he can help an NFL team, but he can't for fantasy football purposes. There's just no world where he can be a reliable fantasy asset in any situation. That's still the truth. But I'm falling hook, line, and sinker for, drafted by his dad works at the team, and so now there's this connection. He's getting some run in camp, and people are talking so good about him. Obviously, his production in college was outrageous. I mean, you don't have many people that produce like him. Talk me out of it.
So they showed a clip today of him doing some pass protection against Dante Fowler, who's like 6'3" and, was a top 5 pick and everything. And it's hard to tell because some people are responding to it and they're like, oh, Deuce Vaughn, he's really just holding his own. It's like, this is his teammate. I don't think his teammate's just going to pick him up and throw him, but he could. He literally could if he wanted to just body slam him. So I don't really care about any training camp highlight, whatever, that you're going to see from this guy. Jason, he's a fun player. And if you want to measure heart, I'm down with that. I'm a sensitive guy, so I get it, but how many touches is this guy ever going to get in a game? 5?
Yeah,
maybe, if he's lucky.
I mean, that's exactly the point of why I discounted the concept of him being relevant in the entire scouting process. It's just it's bad process to believe he will ever get touches.
Can I just read his Dynasty blurb real quick in the UDK? Because that's a good one.
Oh, please do. Please do.
The diminutive Deuce is a heartwarming story, but he finds himself in the first percentile of RB measurables for height and weight. This is not the good 1%, in case you needed help in math class. So, 176, man. I mean, these guys just don't play in the NFL, right?
Not just 176. He's 5'6".
That's
he's
the argument.
5'6".
That's the argument against Deuce Vaughn for you there, Jason. The diminutive Deuce. I love that, Kyle. I think you wrote that.
The argument for him is 1,558 rushing yards along with 378 receiving yards 1 year. The year before that, 18 rushing touchdowns with 1,400 rushing yards. Yada, yada, yada. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But I want it to happen.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the desire. We will be next week talking about some of the nasty boys. So we have a master list of players that you can do a deep dive on. So I will just tell you right now, Deuce Vaughn is not on that list. We'll just honorably give him the mention as he wasn't even allowed to attend it, but he was in the junior team for the Nasty Boys. And that's okay. Is Deuce Vaughn on this team in 2 years?
I think so. I think he is. I think he'll be a valuable. I'll believe a player like
Return
that
man?
will. Yeah, he'll be involved in special teams. He'll be used in gadget ways. The fact that he's got the connection, and this is one of those funny, rare things that actually do matter, human relationships. We forget that these are people, right? The fact that his dad is a longtime scout for the Cowboys, they drafted him, they had that moment. I do think that matters, the relationships within the building when they come to say who's going to make this roster and who are we going to cut. It just gives him another chip in the pot of like, if he's on the bubble and it's him or the other guy, do we want to look at his dad every day as we walk through the halls after we cut him?
That would be awkward.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying they can't cut him. I'm just saying that's another feather in the cap.
Yeah. And I'll just tease this because I like a pro tease. Love it. Next week, we might be talking about a different Dallas Cowboys running back as one of my favorite nasty boys that you could get right now in your dynasty leagues if you want to. So that's a tease. Just throwing it out there. And I'm going to close this down on this show. That's going to do it for this dynasty episode. Check us out, ultimatedraftkit.com. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.